A brief disclaimer. I do not own the copyright to any of the films I'm about to discuss and preview. The entire point of the video is to encourage people to go out and purchase these movies, which are for one reason or another out of the public eye almost entirely, or did not, in my opinion, get a chance to be in the public eye, at least for very long. I am recommending all of the following films.
Thank you, everybody, for joining me. I want to thank especially the names you see on the screen. Everybody nudged me to do a second part of this video, especially Katie. So thank you a lot. And I also want to thank all 20,000 subscribers I now have. Thank you for that. Thank you to each of you. Thank you to my wife for filming this. The last video I made of this, I told you where to find some movies. I'm not going to do that this time for the most part, but I will be providing some links in the description box. I acknowledge all the changes that have been made in the 8 years it's been since I made the first video. Everything's going to streaming and DVDs are going out of style. A lot of movies that are famous or have been famous and popular that once were seen very frequently, you would expect them all to be streaming now, but they're not. Those are the ones that are now in danger of becoming rare or obscure or forgotten. A perfect example of this is Silkwood from 1983, starring Meryl Streep. Can't find it anywhere, except on DVD. I want to address real quick some comments about my last video and the titling of it. A lot of people seem to have thought that I applied each word, rare, obscure, forgotten, to each movie, and that's not the case. I want to make sure hopefully all of you are keeping in mind that we're talking about perspective. Some people have seen a movie in one part of the world, and then it's obscure in the other part of the world. So that's how I mean it a lot of the time. Oh, I want to encourage everybody to go to your metropolitan library. Yeah, if you're in North America, there's this wonderful place for resources. Check out all kinds of movies there. Also, you automatically, getting a membership with them, get a free membership with Canopy and Hoopla Digital, where you can see a lot of these movies for free. That's all. Thank you to everybody. Let's dive in. If I were to compile a top 10 list of favorite Japanese films ever made, and I am considering doing just that, this beautiful piece of work would be found somewhere in it. Yoso, also known as The Bronze Magician, was made in 1963 during the Japanese cinematic art house golden age and is now all but completely forgotten, particularly here in the West, where it's barely been seen at all. If you look this one up on the Internet Movie Database, you'll see its plot synopsis directly beneath the title, which I wrote for the site. And so I'll put it to you exactly as I did there. Quote, a Buddhist priest becomes also a magician, dedicating himself to the protection of life wherever it's needed, whereupon he finds himself in direct service of the Queen. Political intrigue tightens around him as it is increasingly assumed that he harbors ulterior motives. Set in Japan's Nara era, 710 through 794 AD, the story is loosely based on Mikado, Empress Koken Shotoku, and Dokyo, a Yamabushi mountain warrior monk who practices a rugged, intense form of Vajrayana Buddhism founded by his master Doen. End quote. You would also see on IMDb that, at least at the time of my recording this, there are but 3 reviews and 77 ratings for this movie. It is set during the arrival of Buddhism in Japan, and feels like a fairy tale. In fact, that is probably its defining feature, its mythological tone throughout. Romance, political intrigue, and fantasy are equally and seamlessly blended throughout. It's unbelievably beautiful, and will have you longing for many more of these black and white Japanese films, which, along with those being made in Russia and much of Europe at that time, far outshined what was happening in American cinema, at least generally speaking. Raizo Ichikawa gives us the performance of his career as the priest/magician. I wish you all the luck in the world tracking down a copy of this, because I assure you if you are successful in so doing, it is akin to finding the Holy Grail by accident. Hopefully, Toho Studios will make this available to the world very, very soon, and it's truly a shame that ownership disputes or whatever other reasons we're left to guess at leave us all sitting unaware of what beautiful artwork remains legally hidden from the world. It's just like the Vatican Library, requiring requests of specific book titles before even considering granting you permission to peruse the work. Yet this policy leaves us perpetually ignorant of most of the specific titles in their vast collection. So how can we possibly request what we're unaware exists? At any rate, I encourage everyone watching to, if unable to see this beautiful, rare gem, track down other Japanese films from the 1950s and 60s, really almost anything, to enjoy a flavor that's long since faded. When the 1995 version of The Island of Dr. Moreau first went into production, it had a modest budget and appeared to be the promise of epic strangeness to be helmed by the very young and very unique South African director Richard Stanley. It was going to be the next blockbuster intriguing moviegoers into theaters, starring the likes of Marlon Brando, Val Kilmer, and David Thewlis, and almost starring Rob Morrow, James Woods, and Bruce Willis. Well, one thing turned out to be correct in all those high hopes. It was epically strange and epically bad. This movie, a documentary from 2014 managing to pull together many of the crew and a few of the actors almost 20 years later, who either begrudgingly or humorously tell stories of the hell they endured behind the scenes, is every bit as incredible as Dr. Moreau was supposed to be. They even interviewed the president of the production company at the time. It was filmed at a spot in northeast Queensland, Australia, most appropriately named Cape Tribulation. I should state as soon as possible that if I could meet just one film director in my life, it would probably be Richard Stanley. He's an amazing artist, as well as practicing occultist with a penchant for witchcraft. This is a guy who fears nothing, but lives quietly and converses in a cool and welcoming way, as sincere as can be. He got involved because New Line Cinema was bringing in new directors to freshen and diversify their output, and as someone in the documentary puts it, quote, they were also experiencing a kind of identity crisis, end quote. And so doing this was also rather necessary. He had caught the attention of New Line's president for his first two feature films, Hardware and Dust Devil, from 1990 and 1992, respectively. There was an esoteric quality about his work that you could feel sort of hinting at itself in the background, a little subversive something trying to be conveyed to the audience just beyond the story in the foreground. Something unusually interesting. I will not spoil any of the anecdotes shared in this film because it's the way in which those are given that makes this movie so enjoyable and even a little bit shocking. Seriously. Actually, I won't spoil, but for one thing. I realized when it ended that David Thewlis was the only main cast member who is not mentioned here, even once in passing. And I can't help but wonder why. Did he ask the director to leave him out completely? Some of the best insights come from Stanley himself, as well as German actor Marco Hofschneider, who was supposed to have a much juicier role but got pushed further and further away by the random demands of Marlon Brando's ego. Every time you find something out about what the cast and crew dealt with that causes you to laugh incredulously and think to yourself, oh, that's just messed up, you will then be handed a further bit of information that will top it and leave you speechless. And then again, and again, and again, until you realize all the true events which occurred during the making of The Island of Dr. Moreau really are the stuff of legend, and that this is all akin to the epic behind-the-scenes story of Werner Herzog's 1982 film Fitzcarraldo, or how 1963's Cleopatra nearly bankrupted 20th Century Fox. Although the 1996 movie that this documentary is about can hardly be recommended on its own merits, it becomes recommendation material only after watching this, since it opens a new context for so many of its details. I personally believe that it would have been a great movie, every bit as strange and interesting as its director, if the whole thing hadn't spun out of control beyond his capacity to rein it all in. I'm going to go far out on a limb with this one and just say to you all, trust me. This is Sparrow from 1993, starring the perfectly cast Angela Bettis as the doe-eyed Maria, our main character. We follow her home from a convent in mid-19th century Sicily as an epidemic of cholera breaks out. This film actually feels almost exactly the same as that greatest of all versions of Romeo and Juliet from the late 60s, truly on par with it in the visual poetry and the mysterious way Zeffirelli has with causing his audience to feel they're sharing a secret with the main characters. It's something he always does, quite naturally, and it's his definitive genius. I'm utterly at a loss as to how this film is not well known or why it had no distribution or even advertising here in the U.S. It left me thinking long and hard about all the people throughout history stuck in such a situation, that of a creative and free spirit who, through years of cultural conditioning, stifles their own love and joy and other emotional truths so that they can psychologically deal with the harsher aspects of life as it is in their immediate environment. Really, that's someone everyone can relate to, almost no matter the time or place or culture, or in this case, religion. Why should anyone ever have to make a choice between being with the person we love wholeheartedly and the God of one particular religion? We shouldn't. It's that simple. Such a choice is mandated to us by those who've succumbed to such cultural conditioning. This movie also has Vanessa Redgrave, who is as great and classy as ever, playing an old nun who's basically lost her mind and regrets having long ago given up true love for becoming a bride of Christ, also representing Maria's potential future. The soundtrack from Claudio Capone and Alessio Vlad is sweeping yet subtle, feeling like something composed by Mahler or Chopin in one of his symphonic works. Like the earlier reviewed Yoso, the Bronze Magician, you can see for yourself on IMDb the very few ratings and reviews it has. At this point, just a couple of hundred ratings and 8 reviews. This is a most ideal historical drama for which I give to you the highest recommendation, along with big wishes in finding it. I would love to see this one restored and re-released to theaters, particularly here in the U.S. where it never really had a chance. The Bird People in China from 1998 is among Takashi Miike's most inaccessible and therefore underappreciated movies in the West, and for all I know, in the East as well. This director is generally known and counted on for his shock value, whether in visual gore or psychological revelation. Not so here. Fans and followers will be disappointed if that is the main or only driving force behind watching his movies. This is the one I recommend to all. The violence is relatively minimal. In fact, aside from a brutal machete attack, it is relegated to a few slaps and punches, which half the time have a comical context. We follow a businessman sent by his company out to a remote village to evaluate the quality of jade being mined there, while a Yakuza member is sent to accompany him as a sort of quality assurance supervisor. Along the way, just as they think they're losing themselves, they find themselves. becoming bonded over growing mystified with certain villagers met in the remote Chinese wilds. That is, the bird people, whose existence is far more valuable than that of jade. The soundtrack here is amazing, and the humor quite unexpected, though it's very dark. I'm at a complete loss as to how this controversial director has managed to successfully go from mystery thriller to screwball buddy comedy to timeless philosophical and spiritual drama, all in one film. If you find that you loved this movie as I did and want to seek other work of his, please be warned, you are in for a graphic experience wherever you turn afterward. Either way, the ride will be unforgettable. Toto le Heros, also known as Toto the Hero, is as whimsical as it is emotionally intense, and I've often recalled this movie in great detail and with great fondness in the almost 30 years it had been from its release in 1991 until I'd recently rewatched it for the making of this video. The old two babies switched at birth gimmick may seem trite and contrived and overdone, but I assure you it is a most necessary plot device in this case. Tomas, our protagonist, narrates for us the story of how such a thing happened to him, and how he's had to live someone else's life. We experience his life through the perspective of his young, middle-aged, and old self, as portrayed by 3 different actors. When I think back on the 1990s in general, I think of this movie, which carries the feeling of speaking to an old friend after a very long time, but it's as if no time has passed since the last conversation. Its most engaging aspect is the romance, which fans of the wonderful Italian film Cinema Paradiso from 3 years prior will find strikingly similar. I promise, if you manage to track down this film, you will never forget it. From 2010, we have an HBO production starring Claire Danes in what I'm going to go ahead and call the performance of her career. It's the true story of the woman whose name is this movie's title. In a nutshell, Temple Grandin is a genius who happens to be autistic. It is her ideas upon which all modern animal herding in the livestock industry are handled far more humanely than they used to be. This is her biography and the story of how she came to design such a system, while also learning to overcome her own mental and social disabilities and challenges. The screenplay does not insult either we the audience or the woman upon whom this was based, by treating her as either a superhero or someone always lacking or in need of care. All human beings have equal potential for good or bad, including Temple Grandin, and we get to know her honestly through the sincerity of the script. In 2011, Claire Danes won a Golden Globe for this, specifically Best Performance, by an actress in a miniseries or motion picture made for television. On that same evening, David Strathairn won Best Performance by an actor in a supporting role in a miniseries or motion picture made for television. And the reason I mention these two deservedly winning what they did for their work here is that the development of their characters' relationship is my favorite of the movie's aspects. It's most endearing. David Strathairn plays her science teacher, a quiet and reserved, yet also candid and forthright man who is well near the only person who truly sees and understands her, and seeks to help with manifesting her aspirations, being that he sees also just how trepidatious everyone else is about being near her. This is simply a wonderful movie which is readily available to watch, but which I feel came and went too abruptly and went largely unheard of on a worldwide scale, but for random word of mouth or finding by chance every now and then. I encourage you all to find it soon and enjoy watching good actors thoroughly enjoy their craft. Kihachiro Kawamoto is the perfect and most ideal of artists, being that in his films he blends animation with puppetry, and often uses little to no speaking, though audio is used, to great effect, particularly regarding natural background sounds. All his work is equally recommended, but his short film, To Shoot Without Shooting, from 1988, gets a special mention since I found this one on YouTube and not on the only 2 DVDs I was able to track down until very recently. I recommend that film as an introduction to any who've not yet experienced his work, or another called The Demon, or a feature-length film called The Book of the Dead. I guarantee you'll feel yourself pulled into the magical world of mythological storytelling from a true artist who's an absolute master of his craft and whose work may just leave you feeling, after returning to the sameness of modern movie making, rather cheated. There is a certain production company notorious for taking down YouTube videos even when they're well within the legal compliance of fair use law. Please know that if you see this video and look to return to it later but find that it's mysteriously disappeared, that it's more than likely due to unfair and untrue claims made by that company, which shall here go unspecified, but references group of brothers. Anyways, the movie which exists because of this company, which is rarely ever shown, and for which I'm actually extremely grateful to the aforementioned company for making, is called All Mine to Give. It's from the year 1956, and it begins with that typical 1950s American movie feel. Orchestral score, happy-go-lucky attitudes, even among those living most harshly, and the general assumption that all will be well in the end. That's not to say it ends in utter tragedy, but for a movie made in that particular place at that particular time, I assure you that you will be taken to unpredictable places in unpredictable ways. Until Christmas of 2012, or 13, I can't remember which, I had never heard of this movie. Now I admire it and praise its writer and director for going places most American filmmakers would not, at a time when, at least here in my home country, most movies felt like they were written, produced, and directed by the same people, much like Netflix originals today, but please don't get me started on those. I would never ever stop. Please do yourself a favor and find this movie, which is readily available on DVD, for an unexpectedly realistic experience of a pioneer couple arriving in 19th century America who are about to start a family. Unfortunately, after watching this, most 1950s movies from the West will feel even more timely and hokey. Have I made my point yet about movies during this era? La Otra Conquista, or The Other Conquest, is a Mexican film from 1998, which is perfect follow-up viewing right after Apocalypto from 2005. Watch it as if a sequel to that, even though this one was made 7 years prior, and that film centered around the Maya while this one focuses on the Aztecs. We begin just after the decimation of the Aztec culture, a total military conquest, but this is not the conquest to which the title refers. The other one is spiritual and religious. It is early in the 16th century, and we find ourselves in the aftermath of Hernan Cortez's genocide upon the Aztecs, and following Topiltzin, who was a court scribe, now recording and illustrating the vast scene of death and destruction all about him. He is the son of the now-dead Aztec ruler Montezuma, and he is awakened into a new world with a new god. Also still living, he discovers, is Montezuma's daughter by another woman, once called Tecuichpo, but now christened Doña Isabel. Topiltzin is taken into an order of monks and also christened with a new name, Tomas. Cortez has forced Doña Isabel into marriage, and a local priest, Fray Diego de la Coruña, oversees the conversions and religious duties. It seems everyone, though, perhaps save Cortez himself, has secret desires and wills waiting to be acted upon. This was written and directed by Salvador Carrasco and remains the only feature film he's ever directed, which is a shame, because his work here is not only a standout achievement, but feels like a promise of things to come. He bears many producing credits and is still working hard today, but my God, I wish he would write and direct more movies. And perhaps this stands as an example of a movie variation on the theme of the old quote, "Everyone has one great story in them." I know, I keep bringing old Japanese movies into the fold, but I hope by now you trust me with these. In this case, we're talking about a film from Akira Kurosawa, one of the greatest and most famous directors in the world. So then, why should I bring up such a person in the context of rare, obscure, and forgotten films? Well, this movie in particular, Dersu Ozala, from 1975, is comparatively little known or remembered. It certainly is remembered to movie buffs and Kurosawa devotees, but now, 45 years after it was made, it just as certainly deserves the chance to reel in some newcomers to Kurosawa's work. In fact, there's an analogy that's followed me for a long time now, which I stand by. By the time I reached age 30, I had somewhat often heard women talking about how much they loved the movie Beaches from 1988, I believe 88, somewhere in the late 80s, because it reminds them of their best friend, and that movie gradually took on the status of being the ultimate girly movie, alongside Steel Magnolias. Well, you see where I'm leading you? I submit that this movie is Beaches for men. Yes, I said that. This movie is about the ever-strengthening friendship between two very different men from very different worlds who find they must work together to survive, and each has something to learn from the other. Arsenev is an explorer sent, along with a band of soldiers, by the Russian army deep into the Siberian wilderness. There, among the endless and serene plains and taiga forests, they meet the title character, Dersu Ozala, a nomadic hunter who is essentially one with the forest. When Arsenev and Dersu are separated from the rest of the pack, their bond is sealed in their vigorous fight for survival together against the worst elements of nature. They will meet again one day and face new challenges together. I will leave it at this, being that it's such a simple story, and its execution here is yet another sad reminder of precisely what we're missing today in movie making. As it states in the movie's intro, quote, "The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, directed in 1963 by Jacques Demy, shot on 35mm silver color stock in a 185 panoramic format, was restored in 2013 by the laboratory DIG Image. The restoration of the images was made in digital 2K from a 2K scan of the interpositive black and white trichrome selection. Mathieu Demy supervised the color grading. The sound restoration was carried out using the 1963 mono mix, the 1992 Dolby SR optical negative, and the 1992 digital multi-track tapes." End quote. I understand the director's children were closely involved in this restoration, which feels reinvigorated and alive with all that moving color. I had some issue with the general tone of this film, feeling like I don't really know our two main characters nearly as well as I should by its end, but in a way, that doesn't matter. What matters is that two young people fell in love before one of them is required to enter military service, while friends and parents try to dissuade them from one another during the interim. Romance in dramatic storytelling hardly needs more. The music is by Michel Legrand, and it stars a 21-year-old Catherine Deneuve. This is among the most colorful films you'll ever see, and I'm wondering if anyone out there old enough to have seen this in theaters upon its initial release is even aware of this restoration. I certainly hope so. And I'm convinced that the relatively recent American movie La La Land was directly inspired by this movie. Criterion has made a short film about the restoration, and I will provide a link to it in the description box below. I should also add that there is no spoken dialogue whatsoever. All of it is sung. All of the music is continuous. Believe it or not, you'll get the hang of it and fall into the spirit of things. It's one of the things making this so unique. It's the believable acting that makes this low-budget sci-fi thriller work. Like La Otra Conquista, its writer and director, James Ward Burkett, has made only one feature film, and there's no sign of any others to come, however much I may wish for it. Coherence, made in 2013, was made on a budget of $50,000. It was filmed over a period of just 5 days with a small group of actors who mostly improvised the dialogue, with just a bare-bones understanding of the story's secret and how the plot would unfold. My God, does it work! This kind of thing happens every once in a while, but often feels gimmicky or just doesn't work at all. But the acting here and the dialogue, it all comes off so naturally. I encourage everyone to look this one up when you're in the mood for a high-tension drama that will leave you fascinated with the art of storytelling itself. Is sci-fi thriller even a thing? An existing genre or subgenre? It seems that if so, it was born and passed away again with 1979's Alien. That movie is legendary by now in the collective. Well, so too should this be. Really. It flies by far too quickly, and you'll want to see it again as soon as it ends, just to make sure you didn't miss anything. Please, Mr. Burkett, make more movies. I think of Pretty Maids All in a Row as a time capsule from 1971. A scattered nugget of politically incorrect nostalgia which puts on display all the things that nobody would even consider putting in a movie at any time, either before or after the 70s. Make no mistake about it, this is a very bad movie. You can make fun of it and roll your eyes and facepalm and cringe all the way through it, but I recommend it all the same for that very reason, which is worth repeating. This represents something that could only happen in a single era. That strange anything-goes time period running from the mid-60s through the entirety of the 70s. In fact, its main tone is one that most people today would be genuinely shocked at while sitting through. Back in the very early 80s, Siskel and Ebert made a special show about what were at the time quickly developing tropes in modern horror movies. They were focused mainly on all the Friday the 13th movies and rightly exempted many from their list, including the groundbreaking original Halloween from John Carpenter. A point that Roger Ebert made, which has always stuck with me, applies here. He stated that in many of these movies we get a forced perspective when the usually female victim is walking down a dark hallway or trying to escape a demented axe murderer. The camera shows us the point of view of the killer, creeping up on her, often for uncomfortably long stretches of time, and subversively asking us to identify with the killer. Here, the camera is constantly serving the perspective of both a teenager who's only ever wondering when he will ever have sex, or one of the teachers who's also a guidance counselor. And we, the audience, are their eyes, darting out at women's blouses and trying to go up their skirts, and watching their rear ends jiggle while moving chalk against a blackboard. The entire aim seems to be bringing exploitation fodder to the mainstream, as if a study of teenage psychology in average social situations. It utterly fails in that the contrived social situations are anything but standard. A young girl's body is found in the high school bathroom. A cop shows up with students standing around gawking, and lame attempts at humor are casually made before her parents are even called to inform them of what happened. Rock Hudson plays the creepy teacher, by the way. The idea here is that everyone is suspect. And when I say that you cannot possibly get more 70s than this movie, I back that up by naming more of the cast. Telly Savalas, Keenan Wynn, Angie Dickinson, and Roddy McDowall. And the biggest surprise of all, and I mean it, this fact continues to surprise me, is that this movie's screenplay was written by, of all people, the creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry. This movie is worth owning, if for nothing else to serve as an entertaining reminder of the fun, bygone days of movies before the thought police forced politically correct terminology upon us. This is absolutely free of it. It's very, very weird. All characters, except perhaps that played by Telly Savalas, say and do things without any apparent reason, as if it made sense to the screenwriter alone, while he presumed we'd understand his thought process in writing such unnatural, jumpy dialogue, which serves only to get us from one short skirt to another. It is an absolutely fascinating failure. I'm actually surprised to see that it's now available on Amazon, since for so long it couldn't be seen anywhere unless you somehow found a bootleg copy, and that on VHS. And it seemed that probably someone or several someones responsible for its making were trying to hide its existence, much like Disney is still trying to do with their shamelessly racist 1946 movie Song of the South, which was re-released in theaters even in the early 1980s. Despite all I've said against this movie, I also stand by my suggestion to go dig it up. And then dig it, baby. Just remember, you've been warned. This is among the weirdest movies I'm sharing with you this time around. Eureka from 1983 comes to us still to this day in no other guise than that of VHS tape, an extremely rare Korean edition of a DVD. I see now, though, as of the making of this video, that Masters of Cinema has released a Region 2 DVD for it. This is another esoteric piece of work from the highly original Australian director Nicholas Roeg. It is set in 1925, somewhere in the Arctic, where Jack McCann, played by the ever-brilliant Gene Hackman, is finally about to find the gold he's been searching for after a 15-year fruitless search. It is loosely based on the true murder story of Sir Harry Oakes, which occurred in the Bahamas in 1943. The title carries a double meaning, as Eureka is also the name of his Caribbean island home we find him in many years later. Jack struggles with thinking everyone is out to steal from him, including his daughter, played by Teresa Russell, and her husband, played by Rutger Hauer. Part of what I hesitate to call the plot, which develops from the movie's second third, is that of some gangsters trying to take over Jack's island to turn it into a casino. Guess who's behind all that? A very young Joe Pesci, of course. If you manage to get your hands on a copy of this ever-rarefying oddball and watch it, or if you're watching this review now and recall the movie, a very familiar feeling may be coming over you. That's probably due to the screenplay having been written by Paul Myersberg, who also wrote the one for Roeg's previous film from the mid-70s called The Man Who Fell to Earth, starring David Bowie. In both films, we move from one scene and time period to another without being too sure how much time has passed, or whether at first we've gone into someone's memory or we're moving on to something new. It happens very much in the way of a Stanley Kubrick film. Now, I'm not comparing these films to Kubrick's in general, only in terms of the passage of time and being beyond the reckoning of any single individual. They both compress long stretches of time endured by main characters who lose their way after achieving a goal they had at the story's start. When I call this esoteric, I mean not just in the way the story is told or filmed, but also in the almost fleeting way that Jack's wife reads tarot cards, or that his son-in-law studies and reads the Chinese I Ching and relates it to present circumstances, and many other details to watch for in the background, or often, too, right up front and center of a given shot. In one scene, Teresa Russell's character is writing a letter, and we can see the 1830 French psychological novel Le Rouge et le Noir, or The Red and the Black, which is an equally esoteric story and also tells of a man who comes from a poor background and rises up through society to become very rich and is tormented by what his money and fame have brought. If you've not yet seen anything from Nicolas Roeg, I recommend also what I believe to be his best film, which is much more readily available, something from 1973 called Walkabout, which nicely and often comically nutshells Western civilization's rigidly held taboos regarding eroticism. I found my copy of Eureka rather easily on eBay, but notice it's not exactly in numerous availability. Also, this version was not a cleaned and restored picture, just a straight-up transfer from VHS. Still, no complaints here because it looks just like watching on a 1980s television set. And with the antenna working properly, that really just means the colors are not crisp. I'm cool with that. The title of this one is a play on words, also referring to the prophet, spelled Prophet, and it is a telling of the story of L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology, but without using any real names. I won't spend much time on this one since it's really as simple as what I've just stated. It was filmed in 2001, but never officially released. Why? Despite the fact that no actual names were used, it was simply obvious that this was the story of the birth of Scientology and its founder. And so just 1 week before filming finished, Scientologists protested against its completion and basically won. As a fellow IMDb reviewer so succinctly puts it, quote, "The film has been tied up in litigation in the U.S. ever since. The pity of the situation is that the A-list crew members couldn't cross the protest line because it was made up of striking union members. This meant that the production values dropped considerably, and in the shots that made it into the film from that period of shooting, it is obvious that it is not the same crew." End quote. So, the end result is that this will look and feel much like you've turned on some average cable movie on a mid-afternoon weekday. But I would ask that you let that slide, the look of it, considering all that's happened to it since it was completed. I invite anyone interested in what goes on behind the scenes of this leech-like religion to give this movie a chance, and also to compare what we know to be true about L. Ron Hubbard's history with the story that unfolds here. All things considered, even were this an original movie, it would still be a very good one. There's an important message here, and writer-director Peter N. Alexander deserves to be heard. After rewatching this movie and writing a little review for it, I immediately realized there is a fellow YouTube user who I follow who reviewed this in a way that was so much better than anything I had prepared. So I would like to turn everybody's attention toward her review. I'll link to it in the description box below. She does a superb study of this movie. Her username is Infamous Sphere, and I encourage everyone to watch her video about it, where she discusses why this is an excellent movie, and she does so far better than I could. It may suffice to merely mention it here in my video and draw your attention to it, but to say that this is an intensely engaging character study, for reasons which the better reviewer I refer you to elaborates. It stars Edward Fox, younger than I've ever seen him, Sarah Miles, Wendy Craig, and my absolute favorite male actor of all time, Dirk Bogarde. I'd first become aware of his status as a masterful actor in seeing his performance in the 1971 film Death in Venice, in which we come to know his character mostly through thoughts and expressions. In this movie, he gives us something totally different from that film's somber, introspective character and plays up a mysteriously sinister leech of a character. If you are or have yet to become appreciative of Bogarde's films, I would also recommend a film he made just a year prior to this one called Damn the Defiant, where he is matched with another actor of equal talents, Sir Alec Guinness. Again, the link to Infamous Sphere's review of The Servant is in the description box below. And I also suggest, while you're there, check out her review of another Dirk Bogarde film, Death in Venice. The Adventures of Prince Ahmed is a silent German production begun in 1923 and released in 1926, based upon several stories from the Arabian Nights, or The 1001 Nights. It is the first animated feature in cinematic history, preceding Walt Disney, no matter what they claim, and was created and directed by a woman, obviously a very unusual thing in her time. The artist Lotte Reiniger made almost 70 animated films, few of which are available for viewing today. The main reason for this is that she had to flee Germany for England in the 1930s, and quite understandably was not able to bring the original negatives with her. So most modern prints are second-generation copies, which of course have resulted in a significant loss of quality. The film, as it is available today, was restored in 1954, as best as could be for the time, and that restoration process, with an added soundtrack, also resulted in images moving faster than they should, at 18 frames per second. The primary tool of Mrs. Reiniger's craft was silhouettes, and she wrote a definitive book on the subject entitled Shadow Puppets, Shadow Theaters, and Shadow Films. Anyway, Lotte Reiniger and her work deserve far more credit and attention, so when you get the chance, please dive into this and her other work. You may just find that you're reluctant to come up for air. I'm convinced Cary Elwes was cast in The Princess Bride because of his role in this. In fact, even the first love scene in Princess Bride, with the sun behind and between them, showing the beautiful purity of the union with swelling romantic orchestral music, seems to have been inspired by, if not outright copied from, Lady Jane. This is a beautiful British film made in 1985 and was one of two films, the other being A Room with a View from the same year, which launched a 19-year-old Helena Bonham Carter to well-deserved fame. This is very nearly a perfect film. I've never made a secret of the fact that I'm a sucker for these historical romantic dramas, whether or not they deviate too much from the actual history. Sometimes that kind of thing is not only okay for movies, but preferable. This movie never set out proclaiming to be an account of collected details of actual history. What tends to fail are those films which do proclaim such a thing, but then give us irrelevant material. Here we have just enough of the real story of Lady Jane Grey, who was queen for just 9 days, but in that time managed to throw the whole court, along with many of its background manipulations, into disarray. King Henry VIII has died, and it is obvious that his very young and very weak and very sick son, Edward VI, will soon also die. So John Dudley, the Duke of Northumberland, along with Princess Mary and the Duchess of Suffolk, get to work social engineering events within the court. In other words, business as usual following a royal death. The Duke's son, Guilford, is forced to marry Jane, and when Edward dies, a very shocked, confused, and downright fearfully apprehensive Jane ascends the throne of England. Almost more unexpected than the placement of the crown upon her head is a developing revelation she shares with her husband. I will leave the description alone here, so as to hopefully whet your appetite. This movie also has Patrick Stewart, and somehow it's become fun to spot him in smaller roles from the 80s. Here, of course, as well as Dune from 1984 and Excalibur from 1981. Among this movie's greatest assets is the fact that there is nothing whatsoever that dates it to the 80s. Truly a timeless classic, which somehow did get lost in time. You need the delicate touch of your fingers to focus and to see with your heart." End quote. From 1999, we have a beautiful film from Iran called The Color of Paradise. It's a simple story about a boy returning home on vacation from his school for the blind in the city. I need to say right up front that this has the best acting I've ever seen from a child. That's Mohsen Ramazani as Mohammed, the main character, who is, of course, blind in real life. We know that almost anyone at his age in his position of being blind will tend to be somewhat of a tag-along to others as they move back and forth through a series of social situations. It's in the in-between moments, when he's waiting for others to do what they have to do, while he's alone, that he feels purposeful and coming into his own, and in which we connect with him most. He develops an increasingly intimate relationship with the natural world in such moments, most notably in my favorite scene when he hears a baby bird crying from the ground and he struggles to climb a tree and return him to his nest. This scene shows everything we need to know about young Mohammed. I really appreciated that this movie has very minimal use of background music. We don't need sweeping orchestral music to let us feel the beauty of the story, combined with that of the lush green northern Iranian coast. In fact, more music would have just distracted from it. This movie represents everything lacking in most modern movies and makes me long for more such as this, which have a very natural emotional impact, without contrivance. You are likely to get at least a little teary-eyed, but not sad, rather because it feels good to see Mohammed discovering the real world around him lying behind the industrial one that we spend our lives building and maintaining in its place. I want to also recommend another Iranian film from the same writer-director, Majid Majidi, called The Willow Tree. I won't say much about this one, but for the fact that it shares the theme of blindness. This one follows a blind writer from Tehran to Paris, where he will undergo some experimental surgery, which will purportedly restore his sight. Whereas Mohammed was constantly discovering nature and beauty in his own way, here our main character Yusuf experiences a rediscovery of the world around him. His reacquaintance with sight also brings some complications which force him to deal with emerging weaknesses and ego issues, and this is where the feel of the whole thing completely parts ways with the other movie. Although it has a slightly more complex story and shares a basic theme with the other film, this one is very much its own experience and just as great a movie. You cannot go wrong in either case. Thus far, I have seen 3 films from Colombian writer-director Rodrigo Garcia, and they are each very similar to one another in tone and purpose, which is why I'm reviewing and recommending all 3 together. If you watch these movies back to back, it feels a bit like an ongoing episodic show. That's not to say that any of them feel incomplete or lackluster, it's just that Garcia loves and respects women and their personal stories so much that his entire drive in making movies seems to be to convey expressions of relationships between women and women's relationships with men, but entirely from their perspective. Some filmmakers make hefty claims of this very thing to the tune of "no one loves women more than me," but with Garcia it's obvious every step of the way that this is his motivation, that he genuinely wants to see women's stories told. But it is extremely important to add that this is not done in a self-loathing, man-bashing way, but more like this. We tell and listen to stories every day and are used to hearing them in a certain way. There are some elements we tune into with greater interest while tuning out others that many consider boring or irrelevant. The feel here is, while most people are paying attention to big shared social events and experiences with world events power played largely by men, women are experiencing such as the stuff being expressed here. Stories driven frequently by their having to willfully let go of their own aspirations in order to help loved ones, and sometimes total strangers, to go after theirs. Personal stories that require attention to subtle details and to the subversive emotional repressions that build and sooner or later have to be faced and dealt with one way or another. It may seem a great irony or even hypocrisy that Garcia, a man, is directing actresses to invigorate characters that he created and writes every line of dialogue for these women. But the thing is, he truly understands them. But I'm a man telling you all this, so don't take it from me. Go find these and see for yourself. Namely, 9 Lives from 2005, Things You Can Tell Just by Looking at Her from 2000, and Mother and Child from 2009. Really, the spirit of all these is the very same, involving vignettes of a day in the lives of several women, where you'll find some interesting and unpredictable crossover parallels. A background character in one story turns out to be the main character in another, and our imaginations are told a whole other story just by seeing how they've intersected. In some cases, without the given characters passing by one another, knowing each other, or being aware of the moment's significance. But we, the audience, do. The actors and plot descriptions would probably add another half hour to this video, so I decided to just do my best in describing all 3 together without actually giving anything at all away about the respective plots. They are each the kind of thing that will get you thoroughly involved in the drama, and yet also have you wanting to wink at the actors, knowing that these are the kind of roles all of them are probably hunting for, where actors can just be actors, and we can enjoy them enjoying their craft. I've only seen the 3 aforementioned titles, but it's probably safe to say that this theme continues in his other work, especially since I noticed he loves to work with some of the same actors he has been throughout his career so far, such as Glenn Close, who appears in his most recent film to date. Rodrigo Garcia, sir, you have my absolute respect for what you're doing. I'll take sincerity anywhere I can get it. Lacho Drome is a French term meaning safe journey, and is the title of this uniquely beautiful film from 1993 from director Tony Gatliff. First, let's clear up some controversy over the naming of Gypsies. It was long believed by Westerners that this particular nomadic culture originated in Egypt, hence the misnomer of gypsy. Many gypsies still accept and use this word, but a great many others do not and take offense with it. They are more truly the Romani or Roma, of course not to be confused with anything to do with the Italian city of Rome. A problem persists here in identification terms similar to that of Native Americans having previously been known as Indians due to Christopher Columbus thinking he'd arrived in the West Indies, and Western civilization largely inheriting his perspective. It would be most ideal to refer to people now according to specific tribe name, but we don't always know what that is, especially by now with so many of them mixed together, as well as with other races. The one term seeming to bind it all without offense is Native American. Well, so too are there differences with the Romani or Roma, from their known origins in having initially become nomads when leaving northern India and traveling on in branching and diverging routes through Turkey and Egypt, and then all over Europe. Since then, new names have cropped up for these variable cultures. For our purposes here, I'll refer to them all as Romani. If I were to make a top 10 list of favorite all-time movies, this is certainly among them. The whole thing visually compresses the entire known traveling history of these people, and does it without any dialogue or narration whatsoever. It's all focused on music being central to all activities of this culture that no one knows how to definitively pin down, yet so many write off as social leeches and dirty vagabonds. The simple premise of this documentary is to present such activity as purely as possible. In a way, this feels like a lengthy world music video, and it does exist to showcase that, but you're getting so much more than just listening and watching people play music. You get to experience why they are playing this particular piece at this time and why that particular piece at that, and feel you're part of the family, part of the reasons for both the laughter and the tears, part of the music. As a musician myself, I felt that this makes you feel something timeless as to why people play music and why we are driven to participate in it with ceremony, and why and how music is itself a story told without words, the very language of emotion which interacts between us. It should be noted that this is actually the second in a trilogy of films Gatliff made about Romani culture, and I've not yet seen the other two, so do not yet know whether or not they are on par with the quality of this one, but the other two are The Princes from 1983 and The Crazy Stranger from 1997. This one has a certain mysterious emotional fulfillment to it. That's the best way I know how to express it. Watch this one in as high a quality as possible, and you will not need an option for subtitles. I cannot say any more about it, you just have to experience it. There's no story. You just need to climb up on a horse and go for the ride. Well, if you'd like to see a great feature movie about the same subject, but with an actual plot and story to tell, as well as, of course, having a wonderful soundtrack, look no further than this Russian movie from 1975 called Gypsies Are Found Near Heaven, also known as Queen of the Gypsies, based upon a story by famous writer Maxim Gorky. This thing is permeated to the bone with that particular 70s campiness that seems to become ever more charming with each passing successive decade. This centers on a group of Roma or Romani living in a fictitious town in the Balkans. From what I understand, most of the cast and extras are actual Roma, not actors, and the songs are sung in the Romani language, not Russian. It is set very broadly around the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, when things were changing throughout the world more rapidly than ever before. While everyone else was expanding and adapting to the new customs brought about by the Industrial Revolution, these people were just continuing to do what they've always done, live simply for the needs of the day. This was made in 1975, released in Russia in 1976, and was the most popular movie there for the remainder of that year, and we didn't get a release here in the U.S. until 1979. Much like Woman in the Dunes, which I reviewed in Part 1, this movie is thick with mythical atmosphere. I felt the entire time that the screenwriter and director were fleshing out a modernized version of some ancient myth. And indeed, this is even filmed poetically. The camera is in love with the beauty of all the flora, as much as that of Radha, a truly bewitching young woman who knows exactly who she is and exactly what she wants in life. That is, until she meets Loiko Zobar, a horse thief who inadvertently resets the course of her life and her heart. Whenever I hear the term visual poetry, I think of this movie. A very warm and immense thank you goes out to Mosfilm, the largest and oldest film studio in Europe or Russia, for making this available on their YouTube channel, and also for finally providing English subtitles. And still yet, for very quickly releasing a copyright claim on Part 1 of this video, when I made it clear that not only am I not giving away the heart of the story in any of the Russian films that I review, but that I'm seeking to bring more viewers to them. So, Mosfilm, thank you again for many reasons, but now especially when the world can enjoy the films you've produced. If you look up Mosfilm on YouTube, that's Mosfilm, you will see their black and white avatar and the word written in Russia's Cyrillic alphabet. And no English. Just click that and browse through their many, many titles to discover some world cinema we had no access to not so very long ago, including this treasure of a film. Or you can find the direct link to it I'll provide in the description box. Need an antidote for the after effects of superheroes tearing apart whole buildings and movies with dark-hearted characters seeking not to be better people, but just plan the perfect robbery? Looking to step outside for some fresh air after all the intense dramas that leave you emotionally drained? Well, look no further than this light-hearted and charming British romantic fantasy from 2016. When I say light-hearted, I do mean lighter than a feather. This can be seen by the whole family and just as thoroughly enjoyed alone or with your romantic partner. This movie is a kindred spirit to Matilda from 1996 and perhaps more so Amelie from 2001 and any given film adaptation of The Secret Garden. In fact, I'm happy to say that this movie is accurately described by its title. Those three words, "This Beautiful Fantastic," can just as accurately summarize the entirety of my review. This is truly a fairy tale for adults. Our central figure, Bella, played by Jessica Brown Findlay, begins renting a cottage near her job as a librarian's assistant. She's had obsessive-compulsive disorder her whole life, yet that fact provides much of the quirky humor. She looks and acts like a young woman displaced from the early 19th century, perhaps a suffragette, but there's also a bit of goth girl here. Circumstances align to push her out of both work and home, unless she can prune and beautify her backyard garden within a very short period of time. Enter her cranky old neighbor, Alfie, played by the always likable, even when playing villains, Tom Wilkinson. Alfie is retired, almost always home, and finds that he misses the cook whom he recently fired perhaps as much as what he cooked for him, after that character has gone to work for Bella next door. In exchange for continuous preparations of food, Alfie offers to guide and help Bella restore the garden to the specifications of the powers that be. An unexpected bond develops between the two, while all three find deepening friendships. Along the way, Bella meets a local inventor who just might be her own divided soul. Mention must also be made of the fun-spirited and very gifted actor Michael Scott as Vernon, the Irish cook with whom Bella and Alfie are playing tug-of-rope. This guy brings big life into everything he does. And the magic spell which This Beautiful Fantastic works upon its audience is so effective that it simply shows us the natural beauty that is everywhere, here in this world, which most people are trying so hard to ignore. The development of her garden remains the focus throughout and is symbolic of everything that changes the hearts of all our main characters. It's about finding your inner artist and providing him or her with the means to grow and flourish and engage in acts of natural magic with fellow living beings. If there's only one movie which this video causes you to seek and watch that will determine whether or not you'll go looking for anything else I suggest, let it be this one. Do the whites accept these half-castes? One character asks a priest. No, they only create them, he responds. Somehow they remind me of, well, flying fish. Born to the water, they spend half their life trying to soar above it, only to fall back again into the sea and die there. This exchange succinctly summarizes the plot of Lady of the Tropics from perhaps the most groundbreaking year in movie history, 1939. It's a tough one to review for the very same racial and racist reasons as Sergeant Rutledge from part 1 of this video. This stars Robert Taylor, an actor by this time comfortably established in Hollywood, and relative newcomer Hedy Lamarr, a half-Hungarian, half-Austrian actress who was, at the time, newly contracted under MGM, and now appearing in this, what would be her second American movie. Robert Taylor had been helped and guided into movie making by several fellow actors, and he is known to have done the same for Hedy in this case, despite the fact that he disliked this movie's script. Hedy Lamarr, it should be noted here, has an amazing life story. She's the inventor of what is today the basis of cell phone technology, called frequency hopping spread spectrum, for which the original patent she submitted with her second husband was originally rejected by the American military in 1942, but then they began to use it 20 years later during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Look into it yourself. It's amazing stuff. This film is largely ignored or derided for attempting to convey a message about contrived racial class systems and how they needlessly block the full interaction of human activity and crush the human spirit, all while actively and hypocritically using those very same racist tools to make the movie. Hedy plays a so-called half-caste, that is, half Vietnamese and half French, or simply, as would have been thought by most at the time, half white and half Oriental. Of course, she doesn't look in any way of mixed race. So, too, is the case, to a far more extreme degree, for actor Joseph Schildkraut, playing the character of Pierre Delaroche. He spends the duration of the movie in some distracting facial makeup, particularly the, what I'm going to call, attempted Asianization of his eyes. This is the stuff that visible cringes and facepalms are made of. Anyone today would throw up their hands and ask, why didn't you just get an Asian guy? And girl, while we're at it. Or both a male and female actor who are of some kind of mixed race. Doesn't necessarily have to be Vietnamese and French. Anyway, strangely, despite all that, it is a treat to see our two leads just enjoy acting. They're both really, really good in their parts. Basically, Hedy's character Manon wants to escape Saigon for France, but Delaroche is keeping her there possessively, using passport issues as an excuse, all while Taylor's arriving character Bill falls in love with her. The issue being explored is, what if she did make it to either France or America? Most people look down on and want nothing to do with the half-castes, and she's told to stay with her own kind where she is, although she has no own kind. Tragically, Delaroche is the one with whom she has the most in common. All things considered, I do recommend this movie as a rare relic of the past, if you can locate it. Let me start off with this one by saying that I recommend all films from Hungarian director Béla Tarr. This one, Damnation, from 1988, is about, as the main character Karar calls it in the movie, the madness of hopelessness. His existence is as drab and depressed as his country's social conditions have created and maintained. He's become a product of his environment, and his only motivation to even draw the next breath or take the next step is in visiting a certain bar and being near its nightly singer, who is married to the owner. This movie feels as if 1940s film noir were given erotic undertones and directed by Andrei Tarkovsky. It is the perfect exploration of loneliness, and honestly looking at just how attached to it we may be when given the chance to see and reach beyond it. Miklos Sekeli and Vali Kerekes are both superb actors, though his character requires a more subdued demeanor, and hers is even more effective and touching. We can easily see why she represents to him all that is missing in life, and that she just might be a sort of guide into a better life and into love and happiness, or at least into the idea of it. Note that the light for the letter R is burned out in the bar's name of Titanic Bar. We then see Ba, which is an ancient Egyptian word for soul. Those of you who've read James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake know that there's a song sung in its beginning which summarizes the entire book. In my favorite scene of this beautifully shot film, the loved but unnamed bar singer serves essentially the same purpose when we hear one of her songs in its entirety. According to the Internet Movie Database, Kerekes has only 2 films to her credit, and that's really a shame that there's no more from her, as I'm sure anyone who sees this would agree. I tend to correlate its director, Bela Tarr, with German director Werner Herzog, who I discussed in part 1 of this video. You almost cannot go wrong in choosing a film from either, but in Tarr's case, this one is certainly my personal favorite. This is a mesmerizing experience dealing with many philosophical questions which never feels contrived at all. These are people forced to ask themselves such questions. I would suggest taking a chance on any of his films, but do suggest this as a starting point if you are yet unfamiliar with his work. You noticed the acronym of a title here. I'll lay that out before reviewing the movie. Light, ocular-oriented, kinetic emotive responses. A thorough understanding of, yet inherent distrust in technology has always been the theme defining Michael Crichton's career. You can see in his nearly forgotten 1981 film Looker, along with his much earlier original 1973 film Westworld, upon which the recent TV series was based, how the same basic story is being told. And I mean that in no negative way at all. It's one which would come to fruition in the form of his 1993 film, Jurassic Park. After which the story would need no more retelling. With hindsight, the 2 former films feel like a dry run for the latter. That leaves us today with a re-watching of Looker as, well, a very 80s-looking movie, which could only possibly exist as a product of its time, and yet strangely intriguing. How so? In much the same way that 1993's action comedy Demolition Man turned out to be, in the passing of time, an accidental and inadvertent prophecy of things that are now true. Corporations are taking over everything, and so many world events are happening because they're manipulated into being by people involved with them. And meanwhile, a docile general public meekly accepts the rules laid out for them by these people. All while police and government officials are growing as frightened as the citizens that they are uniformed to protect. And so violence itself is both an ultimate fear and collectively permitted, since no one wants to deal with it. In the case of Looker, we have technology taking over everything. I mean everything, with computer-generated images replacing actual people and their actual relationships. The particular style of mockery of people so entranced by what they see on television and consider more real than what's actually happening around them is both hilarious and frightening. It is never, though, forced down your throat. All things considered, this is an extremely 80s movie that's too easy to make fun of. Cars, clothes, music, hair, etc., and yeah, why not? You'll have a load of fun doing that. In fact, the dialogue here is very poor I have to admit. But I'm recommending this for those willing to look past the inevitably timely dressing of the final product and appreciate what it's looking to do behind all that. For a very long time, this movie was available only on rapidly diminishing copies of VHS tapes, but was cleaned up and transferred to Blu-ray disc as recently as 2018, and now has a look that most people who've ever seen it never knew. I personally find that the ideas presented in the form of Looker actually outshine their later Jurassic Park incarnation. I should add that perhaps the best of Crichton's movies based upon these recurring themes was Coma from 1978. James Coburn gives a speech in this movie to potential investors in his company, which I admit gave me some goosebumps. It's stuff I couldn't appreciate when I first saw this as a 9-year-old kid. And I'll leave this one simmering for you with some words in that speech. Television can control public opinion more effectively than armies or secret police because television is entirely voluntary. The American government forces our children to attend school, but nobody forces them to watch TV. Persuasion without coercion. This one is not a movie, it's an American miniseries, which I just could not leave out. I need to highlight the fact that no more DVD sets are being produced of this, so get it while you can. Into the West is quite simply the most epic series imaginable. There's a total of 6 episodes, each an hour and a half. It tells much of the story of the American West that was kept from you in school books, as well as retreading some familiar facts and events from varying perspectives. Most refreshingly, there is no political message being force-fed to us. It follows several generations of constantly intersecting families through the entire 19th century. One of these families is white, and the other is Lakota Indian. The central figure and symbol and tool of the wheel is what binds these two together throughout time, through their intention and action and way of life. The white English family name is Wheeler, and all the males therein are wheelwrights, passing on the trade of making wagon wheels, their livelihood. We meet Jacob, one of our main characters, who is the first wheeler desiring to leave the family business for an unpredictable life of adventure on horseback, heading out west to California from Virginia. Simultaneously, we meet also Loved by the Buffalo, a very sick Lakota boy who realizes he is an empath and that he is destined to become his people's new medicine man. Loved by the Buffalo and Jacob will go on through time, inadvertently becoming heroes who drive progress through history and lead successive members of their own families to live similarly. The medicine wheel and the wagon wheel are inextricably bound in one shared symbol, signifying shared human will behind all the hatred and suffering and hardship of the time. It's fun and heartbreaking all at once, and wonderful to see how real people and events are met and explored by this story's fictitious characters. It has no weak episodes like so many shows, or time wasters. In fact, that was a somewhat common complaint when this first aired on TNT, was that it tried to run through far too much of the history of the Old West. But I say, what were those critics thinking, being that this was the entire purpose of the show, to carry us across the continent of North America and across the entire 19th century? They give us to understand this from the start, that this would be the case. So anyone feeling not up for that should have changed the channel. I want to add that my favorite character and performance is that of Margaret Light Shines, played by Irene Bedard. There is a subdued resilience in her demeanor that is so effective and just very good acting that's always stayed with me. For those who've seen this, just recall the look on her face when she raises that Kodak box camera to her face while taking pictures of the battlefield, and the sensationalist newspaper reporter tries not to be sick while seeing this. The story arcs and perspectives of the White and Lakota families are equal. That is, we spend no more time with one than the other. Native American consultants were hired from varying tribes to be consultants for accuracy of language and customs. Like my review of This Beautiful Fantastic, I'm sending out a suggestion for this to everyone. There is some violence that may feel questionable if watching with the whole family, but I do feel that for the most part those scenes are filmed in a way that makes it acceptable, particularly in that the point often is driven home in such cases that we today must understand just how casually such stuff happened in earlier times. And all in all, the actual history is treated most respectfully. It's not bent or twisted to serve any needs of our present story. Quite the contrary. The story is here to serve history. For now, as of summer 2020, all 6 episodes are on YouTube. But please, please buy the DVDs. You're going to want to own this. Thank you so much, everybody, for waiting for this, those of you who did, and for watching. I always appreciate you. Until next time, take care of yourselves.